Azile here, doing a mage combat for Mind Over Magic Mage combat only, kind of a tier list, examining them from their combat viability. And so all mages, we need to evaluate them in a couple of ways. The first would be what we would call, probably the most important, is damage per turn. So it's literally like how much damage can they do within a single turn. The next one, though, would be the efficiency of their damage to mana. So that would be damage per point of mana. So we would come up with a factor as to how efficiently they're dealing damage for the amount of mana they have to spend in the combat. Another thing we should always be considering is mitigation. How can they have abilities that can mitigate damage that your team is receiving, which is important. And then next would be about how their utility is. What can they bring to the battle that is a utility type aspect? Next is buff, debuff. Can they cast spells that will buff your other mages or themselves? Can they debuff the monsters so that those monsters are less effective? The last thing we want to consider is scaling. How do the mages scale? How do their abilities scale as their power increases? So let's get into it. We're going to look at every single mage, and I have gone ahead and made a comprehensive spreadsheet that is really examining damage per turn, damage per mana, some notes and so on, and we'll get into that in a moment. So first, let's just look at the air mage and investigate their abilities. So we don't really look at any of the level ones because these are just when students, like every level, skill level they get, they start to unlock these, right? So if you're starting mage, for example, is a level 3, it's already going to have up to level 3 powers. So what happens is those students they don't start at level 3, they start at level 1. So initially, a level 1 student an air mage would only have multi-strike. Then when he hits level 2, he gets Shield of Wind. And then when he hits level 3, multi-strike 2, which would replace multi-strike 1. So just keep in mind that when we're examining this, we are really often going to be ignoring the air level 1 or the level 1 ability in the list, okay? So what do air mages get? Well, as far as damaging spells go, they get one called Multi-Strike 2, which attacks an enemy 3 times, 3 individual shots, okay? The mana cost of 10, and basically its formula is it's going to do your power plus 3 times 3 because it's going to hit 3 times, okay? This is an incredible ability. They also get Shield of Wind, and it's a common theme. They get various levels of it. So at the lowest level, it just adds a single shield, 1, which will block 1 single incoming damage attack completely negate it, and then the shield will vanish, right, for a cost of 30. And they can do that to any single individual, including themselves. When they hit level 4, they get Haste. Haste will haste an ally for 2 rounds. This is not bad, but it's primarily means that you better be casting on something that you need to act twice, because if you are wasting a turn from an air mage to hasten someone else, I'd be interested to know what exactly that purpose is, especially at a cost of 60 mana. Right? Air mages are designed to do DPS. They're not designed to buff other mages to act twice for that kind of cost. But it is a utility function, and there is case uses for it. It's just not used very much. Next, they will end up getting the air level 5, and this is why when eventually you would want your air mages to be level 5, so they get Shield of Wind 2. This is where this actually becomes quite powerful. Add Shield 1 to allies in the targeted row. So now you could basically put a shield on both your front 2 guys, negating attack from each for a cost of 30. It does mean that the air mage skips its turn, but you don't really, again, with an air mage, you don't really want to use this unless you have to. Next, at level 6, which is really reaching up there in levels, but it does eventually happen, you get Haste 2. This gets a little interesting because now you could add Haste into allies in the targeted row for 2 rounds, okay? So let's say you have 2 air mages in the back row, and one of them is level 6 and has Haste 2. Casting haste 2 on the back row will give haste to both of them for 2 rounds. So this is often now going to be actually appropriate to actually use if you're running 2 air mages or 2 TBSs in the back row, because of the extra actions for 2 rounds across them both. And then finally, if you ever get a level 7 mage, you would be looking at Shield to Win 3, add Shield to Win to all allies. Is this better than Shield to Win 2? In very limited use cases. Generally, your back row is not taking damage. There are only a very few amount of creatures that do AoE to the entire group. The mana shrine thing that the corrupted shrine, mana shrine does that. But again, I can't see that many cases we're going to be striving to protect your back row. There used to be, way back in an early version, lots of creatures that did AoE to the entire group, and all of a sudden this would become very, very effective to counter against that. But now that AoE generally only hits the front row, this one has kind of become redundant. Plus, you got to get to level 7 to even get it. So that's the Air Mage overview, and they're very easy though to go into here and see. I'm basing everything on a mana pool of 125, which is quite achievable, and power 25, which is quite achievable. You can certainly get this higher, and sometimes it can be lower, but we're just to get some continuity, we're keeping these stats. And of course, if I want to change this to demonstrate, all my numbers will adjust, right? So if we had 20, we can see the factors and so on. So let's just go with 25 when we're examining everything as a baseline. So at a base power 25, which actually you can achieve this on your starting Air Mage if you want. You can roll until you get power 25 on a Wolfkin Air Mage. I do it all the time. So you can achieve this level of power. Of course, the mana will be 80, but that doesn't matter. This mana is only for one single spell. The reason I have it in here, we really only care about the power. That gives them a damage per turn of 84 and a damage per mana of 8.4, which is obviously the reason it's highlighted is it's incredibly strong. Okay, so we'll get back to that, the comparison. The next mage we will look at is the Dark Mage. And again, we're only looking at them from combat stance. We don't care about what they do outside of combat. So, okay, we don't care about level 1 because we quickly get out of that. Shadow Cloak adds a Shadow Cloak to an allied position. So this can be cast on anyone. It lasts 2 rounds. Costs 20. It buffs them with Shadow Cloak, which gives them a 25% dodge for 2 rounds. When the mobs attack, then they have a 1 in 4 chance of dodging it, and it's persistent. It doesn't disappear until 2 rounds are over. So every single attack that will come into that position, there's a chance to dodge it. There's a case used for throwing this on your main tank who has armor to preserve the armor longer, but honestly, once again, I just don't feel it's effective enough. And certainly it does not make a Dark Mage to be viable in the front row and to be tanking. This is not effective enough for countering damage, incoming damage, okay? I feel this is unbalanced. This is like too weak. I think that 50% dodge would be a lot more fair, and I even could see a case argument for 75% dodge as being a lot more fair. Right now, you just don't use this. But one of the things this plays into is for Tentacle Lash 2. So Tentacle Lash 2 will deal 20 plus power damage for 15 mana. However, if you have Shadow Cloak on, then it will actually deal 40 damage. So, I can't even get rid of it. Okay, so really to make this effective, you would have to cast Shadow Cloak on yourself, which would be your turn. But that would count as the first round. And then the second round, before it wears off, you'd be able to attack for 60 plus power. And then the Shadow Cloak would wear off. So basically to do this combo, it takes you 2 turns in order to deliver this 1 blow. I feel this is very weak. You're looking at 35 mana over 2 turns, but dodge that's highly ineffective to get a 40 damage from it. I'll show you the math later. It really is too weak. At a minimum, this thing needs to be 3 rounds. If this was 3 rounds, this would start to make it more viable to be wanting to use this. But at 2 rounds, this is a bad combo, and you should never use it. Next, I got Miasma. This is one of the really nice spells because it's an AoE spell. attacks all enemies. And it literally is that. It will, if you have 4 enemies, it will hit all 4 of them. So when we're doing our calculations, we had to actually look at case uses of hitting 4 enemies, 3 enemies, and 2 enemies. You would never cast this when there's only 1 enemy. Obviously, the more enemies, the better it is. It's 25, which is a pretty reasonable cost for what it's able to do. And it does 10 plus your power. Okay. Beyond that, you get Shadow Cloak 2. Okay, this is where this is going to start to make sense with Tentacle Lash, because now it does last for 3 rounds. But again, I feel like getting up to level 5 to get this last for 3 rounds to turn this thing on is still not where you want to be. It does change the numbers for sure, but you'll see with the math and stuff, it's not really still viable. As it's not you're not breaking the DPS formula by getting to here and using this. But we will have to look at Shadow Cloak, this Shadow Cloak 2 combined with their Tentacle Lash 3 to see just what that maxed out looks like, to see it, how it plays out. Miasma 2 attacks all enemies. Okay, this is again related to Miasma 1, but now we're doing 20 instead of 10 plus power to all enemies. So it's slightly increased, but not a lot, because it's only 10 more damage for going up here, and that's all it does. 10 more damage in the world of scaling power and things like that isn't that great. So we will see, though, that again, if you can get a mage with really good power, let's say a 35 power, right, and now you get to 20, so maybe you're looking at let's say 40 power, which is probably very hard to achieve, but it might be doable with some medallion trickery. If you got really good rolls in the medallions plus their acclimate power, let's say you could get it to 40, and I think that's about as high as you could probably get it for natural, not using potions. So you're doing 60. Well, if you do 60 times to 4 creatures on the opening move, that's 240 damage. That's pretty healthy. So anyways, and then of course last they get Tentacle Lash 3. Again, getting a dark level 7 mage is not unrealistic. Tier 3 wands plus gifted, but it's really getting up there, right? But it does start to do some pretty serious damage, 90 damage, or a natural plus your power. And let's say you got like 30 power, or even let's say 40 power, you need 130 damage based on, cast this on the first turn, that's 1 round, and then 2 rounds of dealing 140 damage. Yeah, you can see where it can start to get up there. So we'll look at that math later. Okay, so let's now go back to the spreadsheet and let's look at the Dark Mage and consider all this. Okay, so basic Tentacle Lash 2 is going to do 45 per turn. That's pretty pathetic with a 3.0 damage per mana. Very low. And again, I think that when you're looking at this, compare everything to the Air Mage. Look at these numbers in comparison to Air Mage for making your sort of thought process about this. The Tentacle Lash 2 Dark Cloak 1 combo, though, is actually doing less damage per turn at a way worse mana per damage ratio. So this combo, other than getting your 25% dodge per turn, which for 2 turns, which is really meaningless, it's better to not do the combo, and rather than casting it, waiting a turn, and then doing it. Okay, Miasma, if it's only at 2 targets, so in other words, you have 2 mob. If it's at 1 mob left, don't ever cast it. If there's only 2 targets, though, even then it pales in comparison to what this mage can throw out, unless you had 2 targets that happen to be below what it could do, right? So it's a cleanup move. But that's not ideally what you do. Where it starts to shine, of course, is when you have 3 targets, which is pretty common. Many fights will have 3 to 4 targets. So at 3 targets, you actually are doing now more than the mage can do on a turn, and overall DPS. It's also spread out better, because don't forget, sometimes these things will overkill, and some of this damage will get wasted. Okay, and that's another point to consider. But when you're playing on Relentless Darkness Descends mode, very often you are slamming and you want to do every point of damage you can, because the monsters have really high hit points. So it isn't that often that you're overkilling. However, this is starting where it starts to get viable, and the actual damage per mana starts to make a little bit more sense. Nowhere near the Air Mage, though. Now, if you go off 4 targets, which is some fights will have 4 targets, and then the very first turn, the Dark Mage will cast Miasma, you are actually doing a significant amount of damage to the whole pack, and you are getting a pretty good damage per mana ratio, one of the higher ones on the list, but not as high as the Air Mage. But that is only going to be if you have 4 targets. Not every fight will have that. Some fights will have 2 targets. Some will have 3, some will have 4. And as soon as one target dies, which obviously in every fight you want to get targets dead as fast as possible, then this starts to diminish down. And it's not as mana effective as, say, the multi-strike from an Air Mage. This does scale very well. For example, if I were to change just to 35 power, then we're going to find that these numbers start to really get up there. Whereas the Air Mage, it did kind of increase on that power basis. But when you're starting to just dish it like this on 4 targets, 180 total is starting to just get a little bit higher. But again, very situational. And I don't think it's necessarily what you would build your DPS around. Tentacle Lash 3 on its base face value is terrible. Very bad mana ratio. Meh damage. I can make a starter mage, Air Mage, who can do more damage than this guy can, because I can easily get 20 power on a starter mage, and he's still doing more damage than something that had to be higher level to get this. So very underpowered. The Tentacle Lash 3 Dark Cloak 2, which we talked about before. So basically what happens on round 1, you class Dark Cloak. And then for the next 2 rounds, you're going to get the bonus damage. It still only ends up being a total of 67.67 per turn when you average it out, but you don't do any of the damage until turn 2 and 3. Okay, so you've now lost the turn of doing damage, and in the game of killing things as fast as possible, waiting is not a very good idea. But look at the damage per mana ratio. It is just terrible, right? You would just never want to be spending this. This is one of the worst ratios on the entire thing. Same as this one. So my thing is this. Tentacle Lash and Dark Cloak, these spells, they cost way too much mana to begin with. And this. I know what they were going for this, but they need to be redone. My suggestions is that Dark Cloak should give you a 75% chance, and Dark Cloak 1 should last for 3 rounds, and Dark Cloak 2 should last for 4 rounds. If they made that change and decreased the mana costs a little bit, I think it would get a little bit more balance, where bringing a Dark Mage into combat would actually sometimes be comparable or make sense to bringing an Air Mage instead. You might even then, if they change Dark Cloak the way I've suggested, you might even think about bringing the Dark Mage as the off tank instead of the double Earth Mage always as tank, off tank. Okay, let's get into Earth Mages. So Earth Mage, Earth Armor. Well, this is definitely their one of their mitigation spells, and this is why they are tanks. They get 60 armor. Again, you can get this on a starter mage. 60 armor and taunt 2, meaning 2 attacks that are directed will go to him before anyone else in your front line. And 60 armor will mitigate damage point against it. That is, we all know, this is just fantastic. This is why earth tanks are so important to bring to every single battle. Cost 20, very, very good mana cost. All right, we don't need to say much more about that. But what we really want to look at is this. Smash 2, okay? Attacks an enemy, deals plus 20 damage when you're at full hit points. If you are playing your tanks correctly, which means having them to have higher speed than the mobs you're fighting as much as possible, which we all do if we're playing smart, particularly by getting Wolfkin tanks or with medallions that give us over 20 speed, right? And you should actually be striving to get over 25 speed long term. So you have to assume in the fight that if you are at full hit points, which you quite often are because the armor is absorbing all the hits, especially the off tank, who's there to just take the third or fourth blows, depending on what kind of armor taunt level you have, then this is a very, very nice bonus, if not overpowered. Okay. And this attack costs 10, one of the best costs for a spell that is in the game. When they get to level 4, which is where you want to get them to as fast as possible. So, you get tier 2 wands and make some level 4 minimum. Now you get 120 armor and taunt 3. So suddenly now you're going to take your 2 earth mages in and you're going to have a main tank, off tank. The main tank is going to be the one who will cast this, take 3 blows and get 120 armor. In the case when there's frontline AoE mobs, then or you have 4 mobs, then your off tank is going to cast as well. And the attacks are going to get kind of split up between them and they're going to absorb everything plus any AoE. That's why you run 2 earth mages generally. This is really, really powerful. It's not overpowered in Relentless Darkness Descends. Definitely, it's not like I can never get hurt. No, you'll sometimes take damage. There are mobs that when they hit 3 times in the same tank, 120 is not enough to stop it all. So, but it's pretty close. Certainly, it really helps mitigation. Next, when they get to Earth level 5, they get Quake. Okay, so Quake basically attacks the frontmost row of the enemies. And keep in mind that if there's nobody in the front row and you cast it, you'll cast it at the back row because they're technically now the frontmost row of enemies. So it's not like it's only the front row; it's just the front row. So it deals 30 damage extra when at full hit point, again, which is something your tank should always be striving for, especially the off tank. The off tank should never, ever be down because he's like helping tanking against AoE and extra blows, but primarily you'll have one guy who's arming up and the other one becomes DPS. So the question then is like, well, how good are earth mages at actually just DPSing? And it turns out if you play them right, they're extremely good. So Quake costs 30, which is a surprisingly decent costing, honestly. 15 plus their power, plus 30 when at full health. But it hits the whole front row, so assuming that there's 2 mobs to hit, which you would never cast if there's only 1 mob to hit, then it's actually doing double this because it's hitting 2 targets. At level 6 gets interesting. We're up to Smash 3, which is, to me, overpowered. This spell is overpowered. 40 damage when at full hit points, costs 10. Okay, so now you're doing 60 plus your power for 10 cost. Beautiful. This is, again, broken, overpowered. It's why Earth Mages are so amazing. Level 7, you get Quake 2. Also just sickening. Now for 30 mana, you're doing an extra 60 damage. It's doubled the amount when you're at full hit points. You're doing 30 plus 60, so 90 plus your power, and you're doing it to 2 targets, okay? So let's go over here and back to the spreadsheet and take a look at Earth Mages, right? So we have full hit point, not full hit point, and full hit point for comparison. So as you can see, not full hit points, nothing special is really going on. Smash 2 at full hit points is 55 damage. Definitely it's on the lower end, but it's pretty good comparative to a lot of single target damage that exists out there. But the mana ratio is amazing, 5.5, one of the highest. The only way you're getting that close to that right now is your Miasma 1 on 4 targets, okay? It will get you a 5.6 ratio. So they're not only just getting like a decent damaging attack, they're actually getting really good mana efficiency as well, right? When you get into Quake, again, not full hit point, it's pretty meh. But Quake at full hit points against 2 targets is doing 140, okay? Which is, you have to, again, consider it's hitting 2 targets, right? So that condition has to be met. That's not always met. But then you wouldn't use Quake. You just use Smash, right? So, but if you have the opportunity to hit 2 targets with it, it does a lot of damage in a single turn and has a fairly good mana ratio. We won't care about, again, not full hit points because really it's good. Honestly, like look at this. Without full hit points, you're still able to do 45 or you're 35, but your mana ratio is still fairly decent. But look at this, Smash 3. Smash 3 at full hit points is doing 85 damage based on 25 power for an 8.5 ratio. And that is 1 point better than the Air Mage, which is the king of DPS, but they're only doing a single target. This is a 3-hit blow. Now, it doesn't going to matter because the retaliate situation's being fixed, but here we go. Smash 3, and you need to get your hands on that, you have to be to a level 6, okay? So it's tier 3 wands, right? But realize that your Air Mages are not, other than if you can increase their power, they are never getting a better version of multi-strike. Whereas the Earth Mage is going to get a better version of a DPS spell that is at 25 power going to do more than what your air mages would ever get at this. However, let's look at the maximum power that's really achievable. And it's actually very hard to get. Let's say you can get 40 power though, then boom, it no longer stacks up. The air mage is just completely dominating for its damage per turn, and its ratio is amazing. But he's keeping up. He's still doing 100, and it's 10. And this is on par with Fireball 3 average damage, because it's only 50% crit. So even though it can crit and do more or do less, but this is what you'll average every single turn based on the crit rate. So this guy at 40 power is keeping pace with our Fire Mage, but with a mana ratio that is insane. Second best on the entire list. Right? This is broken. It's so broken that I'm highlighting it for everyone to remember. Okay? It's same as this one. Broken abilities. Right there. Okay, let's go back to 25 power. Okay, so Quake 2, not full hit points. You really should never cast it like that, and you should strive for it, like I said. But Quake 2 at full hit points. But you gotta remember, you gotta get a mage to level 7 in order to get this. But now it's doing an insane amount of damage per turn with 230 and with an amazing damage per mana for a ratio. And of course, let's just try at 40 power and see what it looks like. It goes up to 260. Okay, so anytime this mage could attack 2 targets, it is going to just completely blow out of the water the multi-strike, etc. The point is that Earth Mages are not just for tanking. They are for off-tanking, and they are for DPS. Okay? When you have the best single target DPS and mana ratio on baseline, 25, compared to the Air Mage, there's almost an argument to run 4 Earth Mages as your lineup, and just make very powerful Earth Mages. Because if you were to run 4 level 7 Earth Mages, and you really, really worked for the power to get up there on all of them, which is all viable. It's all viable. You have got, this is devastating. So Earth Mages, broken. That's the tier they're in. They're in the tier broken, in my opinion. Okay, let's move on to Fire Mages. Okay, Fire Mages. A lot of people really like these guys in combat. I did too when I first started playing. Okay, I went crit crazy. I loved critting and stuff. But once I started doing numbers on it, I quickly fell out of love with them. So let's look what they have. We don't care about their first level spell. The first thing they get is Vengeance 1, right? Adds Retaliate 15 to allies in targeted row. Now, I don't know if that lasts for a certain amount of rounds, or once you've done it, it's on them. I actually think that once you cast it on the front row, it sticks for the entire combat. Okay, so what it means is that the front row, or the targeted row, and of course, let's assume it's the front row, is anytime they take any damage, not even damage, anytime anything attacks them, they're going to shoot back a fireball for 15 damage, right? It can add up, especially if you got mobs that are AoE. You can imagine if you put this on the front row, a mob AoEs, they fire at 15, it's like 30 damage, okay? And it's going to go on and on and on as long as the battle lasts. But you have to also remember, if you're playing correctly, most of the time battles should not be lasting like 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds. They should be over in like 2 to 3 rounds, right? Most of the time. There are definitely case conditions where battles last much longer. For the mana cost and the fact that you have to consider that in order to set this up and do it, it's talking about a prolonged fight, the mana cost, and the mage could have cast a DPS spell instead of this, and has cast this instead. I don't think there's many cases where you're going to ever use this. Fireball 2. This is the bread and butter of the Fire Mage. It attacks an enemy 50% critical hit chance. Okay, so what we do with this is we just average it out when we do our formula. We assume that half the time you're critting and half the time you're not. One of the problems with these is, and the same like the air mages, is they can overkill. And the problem is very often they will overkill with a crit, right? So like you'll hit a target and it won't crit. And the next round you'll hit it again and it will crit, but you didn't even need the crit to kill the target. And so you end up wasting that crit. You waste a lot of damage. It's less controllable because it's RNG based. And that's why I do not think these are as good as, let's say, the Air Mage. Air Mage is far more controllable for knowing exactly how much damage you're going to do. This RNG can really, really end up with a lot of wasted damage. And we'll see in a minute, it's not that significant anyways. It costs 20. Pardon me? How does this cost 20? This should be 10. Okay, this is the problem with this. This is too expensive. It should be 10. Okay, that would be a huge step in the right direction for balancing Fire Mage's combat. It does 20 damage plus power. I honestly believe this needs to be higher. I think it should do 30 plus power at this level, and it should cost 10. You'll see why in a minute. Next, they have Flame Lash. Flame Lash is very interesting. It spends half your mana and deals twice that much damage. Okay, so it's interesting though, because the damage ends up being your mana times 2 plus the power that you have. So you actually do get your power added on after it does that twice damage. I think this would be better if it did mana plus power times 2 instead of mana times 2 plus your power. Because right now, I do not feel this is actually worth ever using. And it's very situational too. It would be something where on the open turn of a fight, when you're at full mana, you want to do a ton of burst damage to one single target. Then I could see you using this. But dumping half your mana to do this kind of damage, very, very mana inefficient. Fireball 3 is getting a little bit better. Now we're up to 30 damage plus power, but compared to some of the other stuff that's floating around, I still think this is still too weak and costs too much. This should be 10. This should be 40. Should be 10 mana to do 40 plus the power. I also think maybe the crit rate needs to be increased as well. It's too weak. Fire mages should be, in my opinion, on par for choosing with air mages. I would love to be running one air mage, one fire mage, and feeling like they're kind of about the same mana to DPS ratio and kind of about the single target damage range is about the same. And I really would like to do that. But right now, there's no argument for taking a fire mage over an air mage. There's just none. They don't have the scaling like the air mages do. Then they get Vengeance 2. Now we're dealing 30 back as we get attacked. I still don't think it's really that good. I can see uses for it in some fights, but overall, I just think that mage can do, better stuff. I can see where if you have the tanks armored up and you throw this on them and they're going to take 2 hits each, and maybe one of those is an AoE. Like even let's say 2 of them are AoEs and 2 of them are single target, that's 6 attacks. So 180 damage lashed back at them. Yeah, I mean, it's getting there where that's like every single turn as things die. I could see you using it. This is probably one of the only spells, utility-wise, that I feel makes at the later game, like high-level play, where fights are much longer and stuff. You have some of those big, beefy fights where it's like, yeah, bringing this in and getting Vengeance 2 on the tanks at the start of the fight would really go a long way for dishing out a ton of damage to them. So there is an argument here for this mage. I think, again, if the balance changes were made to the fireballs, knowing that situationally you would also have this with high level, I think then fire mages would be on par with the choice to air mages, right? It's just when I consider what air mages bring, which is more mitigation plus just consistent scaling damage, I really can't find an argument to want to bring fire mages. Last we get Flame Lash 2. This one gets pretty interesting because now you're spending half your mana and dealing triple. So this is going to be now mana times 1.5, right? Plus power. So, that's starting to get up there. I still think it should be mana plus power times 1.5 to fix it. So those are my thoughts on the fire mage. Let's go look at the spreadsheet, see how it really weighs out. Okay, Fireball 2. There's our ratio. You see against an air mage, it is subpar. And as a mana, it is it's not even half, it's less than half the efficiency of the air mage. right? The crit adds too much RNG to the situation. This is actually a detriment. I would prefer that they didn't have crit, and this would just do the damage of what it's supposed to do. 67.5 every turn. Flame Lash, we had to pick a mana ratio for this. So I went with 125, which is, quite achievable on mages. You could get it higher, but part of my reasoning was this. If you're going to Flame Lash something in combat on turn 1, there are very few targets that you would dump half your mana in order to do that too. But one of them is the mites that do AoE to the front row. They have 150 hit points. Very often, getting them killed before they get to act is a huge mitigation tool. So to me, if you were going to have fire mages involved in combat at the earlier level when you're going to Flame Lash 1, you definitely would want to be able to do this. You would want to have a minimum of being able to do 150. And by having 125 mana minimum plus 25 power, you can one-shot a mite. So that's why I did it this way. But when you do that, look at the mana efficiency. It's so inefficient, that damage you're doing, 2.4. Okay. Fireball 3. This is where we start to catch the air mage in damage. We see how close we are. Okay. The only thing is, if I just go up to 30 power, the air mage starts to leave him behind. When I go up to 35 power, the air mage is leaving him behind. So the scaling of the air mage is now really superseding the fire mage. So, but if we were to go down to 20, which is also common in the early game, you can see that there's the case use where Fireball 3 is doing more than Multi-Strike 2. But by the time you've got Fireball 3 online, if you've only got 20 power, there's something wrong with you. You shouldn't be keeping a DPS mage who has power 20. You should have at least 25. So Air Mage outshines even Fireball 3. And this is, you can get this as a starter mage. This, you need tier 2 wands to get your hands on. Okay. Mana efficiency 4.1, not very good. Plus you have the RNG of the crit. Okay. This is the other problem too, where because this is going to be RNG based, instead this is static. I can measure this easier. This actually becomes problematic. So they pale in comparison to the Air Mage. All right. Flame Lash 2 does a lot of damage in the opening move. 212 will kill a lot of stuff, even on the Relentless Darkness Descents. There's a lot of mobs who have less than 212 hit points, and being able to blow one of them out of the water for half your mana, honestly, in a lot of fights is probably pretty good. But again, it is not good enough, in my opinion, compared to what the Air Mage will do. And the other thing I'll talk about in a bit is some of the benefits of why Air Mages actually get even additional sort of buffs within the game itself, right? 3.4 is not very good mana efficiency. Let's go to the Lightning Mage next. So we don't care about the Bolt 1, we care about this. So the first spell on their list, which is a utility spell, is Recharge 1. An ally regains 30 mana and gains 30 speed. It's not bad. However, the cost is stupid. Now, I get what they're saying. Well, if we made this cost less than this, then 2 Lightning Mages could just recharge each other's mana. My answer to that is, so? They're giving up their turn to do it. Okay, they're literally spending their turn, which is way more valuable than the mana itself, right? Transferring 30 mana to another mage is so ineffective. This is so ridiculous that there's literally, unless you want the speed buff, or you have some scenario where the 30 mana would be better used on a different character than a Lightning Mage that you brought to combat. Unless you want that 30 speed, this is a very ineffective spell. Also, if I'm going to go into battle, I'm going to have full mana, right, at the start. And when am I going to want to gain 30 speed? I'm going to want 30 speed at the start of combat. So what am I waiting a turn before I give my mage 30 speed so he can get some mana back? I want to cast this on turn 1 on another mage, give him 30 speed so he's always acting first. Okay, and then that gets wasted and costs him 30. So this spell needs to be reworked. I don't think that they should give speed. I think they need to give something else. I think that if this red ally regains 30 mana and anything else it would be better than what's currently set up. But this should cost 10. This should cost 10 and should give 30. And then it's becoming a little bit more valid in my opinion as a spell. Right now, don't use this. Volt 2. This is their bread and butter. How do you do damage? Cost 15. That's 25 plus power. Can target any position. The problem is it doesn't do enough that you can blow away something in the back row at the highest levels of play quickly. You got the AoE you're sitting back there. A Might, for example, he's got 150 hit points. Well, 25 plus 25 is 50. It's going to take him 3 turns to bring that Might down. I want to just do more damage in this and I'll plow my way through the front row to get at that Might and kill it. 15 is too expensive. This should be 10. And this should do more damage, honestly, if you want to make them on par with some of the other DPSers. The target any position is not that powerful. It really isn't. I think it needs to do more. I'd almost say the way I would fix this is maybe put the cost of 20, leave this alone, and add to this stuns target for 1 round. Because if you could hit the back row and stun lock it while you damage it down, and that's what this mage is now doing, for 20 per shot, I feel like that would be fair. Because I feel sometimes we don't really have great ways to get at that back row when there's an AoE back there. But if you were to allow this to stun the back row mob, I feel that there'd be arguments to bring lightning mages to battle. Right now, there's no argument to bring a lightning mage into combat. Slowing strike. Okay, this is interesting. Attacks and add jolted to any target for 2 rounds. Cost 50. That's 30 plus power. Slightly better than lightning bolt. Obviously, a very bad ratio. So what does it do? It can target any position. Okay, that's nice, but we would never spend this much money to do 5 more damage to the back row. But debuffs 100 speed for 2 rounds. Okay, this is really not a good debuff because you should be going into combat with all your mages having speed that's going to be higher than most of the mobs have, which is 20. And every one of your mages that go in as a combat mage they need to have 20 speed, especially once you get to the higher level fights. And maybe at the first little bit, the first mages you get, you might play around with that. But later on, you got to select your mages very carefully. They're going to be your combat mages. So being able to debuff 100 speed for 50 and not doing much more damage, even being able to hit the back row, there's only one case for this. It's against the Scythe. Right, but if you're up against the Scythe, you better know what you're doing, or you're gonna be dead anyways. It doesn't matter if it gets to go first or last. Right, so slowing strike. Don't think you should ever cast a spell in combat, honestly. Next, we get up to Bolt 3. This is their upgraded bolt. Still costs 15, 50 plus power. So they've doubled it, which I think is getting close to where you would want to be. So now you need to have at least a level 5 mage to be doing some kind of effective power damage, but we'll see in a minute that this is not enough. Yes, the target any position is nice. Yes, now with 25 power plus the 50, he can kill a Might in the back row 2 turns. That's, there's a lot of cases where someone could say to me, hey, that's pretty good. 2 turns of back row AoE are getting taken down. My answer would be your tank should be able to tank that damage by the time you're getting this level of mages online. Your tank should fully be able to go first, throw up 120 armor, and tank through the AoE. And if you have air mages, they'll help with shields, front row shield, across the line. Why would you ever care if you have to kill that back row? You don't. It's just not an argument for it. This needs to be more powerful. I feel like lightning mages are underpowered for sure. Next is recharge ally gain 60 mana and gain 60 speed. So this is now doing what we were talking about, where you spend 30 to give 60. Don't care about the speed, honestly. If I'm trying to give them speed, then I'm not caring about this because it'll be at full mana. 30 for 60, though, is starting to be the proper ratio. I honestly believe it should be that this one could be 30 for 60. It would be a lot more effective, but really what I think it needs to be is 10 for 30 down here. And then up here, it should be 20 for 60 for costing. And again, you got to remember, It's not like you can stand there and just refuel each other's mana, and that's some kind of clever trick. Every time he casts this, he's not doing damage. He's sacrificing his turn to give another mage mana. And I could see cases where it would be important for him to do that to a tank, so the tank could get his armor up and maintain that front line. But most of the time, he would not want to do this. There is some arguments. I just feel like this is, because you give up your turn, this is costing way too much. It needs to be adjusted downwards. Okay, anyways, last one, Slowing Strike 2. Still costs 50. Now it's doing 60 plus power. Okay, it's still just slightly better in damage, slightly better than Lightning Bolt 5. It means you have to have a level 7 Lightning Mage, which is really end game. It still just does the same thing. It can target any position and does minus 100 speed. Okay, there was never a case use that you're going to be casting this. Okay, so overall, Lightning Mages in combat, meh. Absolutely meh. Okay, let's look at the numbers in the spreadsheet. Bolt 2, 50, nowhere near what all of our other highlighted DPSers can do single target damage. Mana ratio, completely terrible. Slowing Strike, we don't even care. Its mana ratio is so terrible. Unless you wanted this, you would never cast this. Bolt 3, 75, mana ratio 5.0, but it doesn't stack up to air mages for sure, and definitely doesn't stack up to earth mages. And it's just slightly better than Fireball 3, but doesn't do as much damage. You know, like right now, these are balanced, but the point is these are weak compared to everyone else. So the last level of Slowing Strike, okay, finally, we are able to do single target damage that is on par with our other heroes, our other superstars, doing 85 with it, right? But the mana ratio is so bad that just because we can hit the back row, we're only going to be doing that for a couple of rounds, and then we're going to have no mana left. So why would I want to be doing this to back rows when I could be spending way less mana with my other guys and just plowing through the front row to get at the back row? I'm not that afraid. If I'm using my tanks properly, I'm not afraid of the back row. Okay, let's go to Nature Mages. Nature Mages are quite interesting, and we are actually getting into one of the mages I think has some utility value for bringing to combat. Okay, so they get Surging Strength 1, adds 10 power to allies in target row for 2 rounds. Okay, there is some case use to this. All right, the problem is it costs 40, and I really think 40 to give so you're not going to have your mage in the front row because he could get chewed to pieces. He's not a tank. He has no mitigation ability. So he's not going to be in the front row and buffing the back row your DPS. What he's going to be doing is he's going to be in the back row and he's going to be buffing himself plus your other DPSer. And let's assume that's an air mage. Okay, so now you're giving an extra 30 damage a turn to your air mage by casting this, but you're giving up by having him in your group. Because he's not doing DPS like crazy. Even if he adds a 10 power to himself, you're going to see his spells do not keep pace. Next up, he gets Growth 2. This is their damage, one of their damaging abilities. It's not that bad. It gives Thorns for 3 rounds, and Thorns basically ticks like a dot at the end of the combat round. Only costs 14. This is a pretty nice cost. I honestly believe it should be cost 10 though. It does 15 plus their power. So we're getting up there, okay? We're doing like, let's say 25 power. Okay, he's now doing 40, but he's also doing 10 at the end of the round for 3 rounds straight. So even on the very first round, he's doing 50 with this. It's not bad. And then he's going to tick twice for 10, and it's going to end up doing 70 based on that scenario for 14. Okay. The problem is it takes 3 rounds to fully get appreciated. And there are many, many scenarios where this is not a valid approach. And the fact that there is no growth 3, okay, this never gets any better. The only way it gets better is based on power. This is weak. And this is one of their primary attack forms. So not a lot of case use for ever using this. You would never bring a nature mage because they have growth 2. Okay. If growth 2, if the thorns actually did something further to the target, then maybe I could start to say, interesting. Okay. I think Growth 2, if Growth 2 got rid of all this nonsense that it says here, and instead what it said is vines grapple the target for 3 rounds, and the target was unable to attack while it was grappled by this, then I would say, oh, crowd control. That's powerful. And it can only be applied to the front position. And I believe that's how this is already, but it should be where you can only do it to the front position, and it would grapple at this level probably for 2 rounds, but let's say 2 to 3 rounds, and have a much higher mana cost. Like, give us some kind of crowd control, and suddenly this mage would be brought. You could argue bringing him to battle. He would be bring enough utility that you could argue that he should be in the back row with the air mage, for example, the other DPS, especially because of surging strengths. Nature level 4, surging strength 2 adds 20 power to allies in the target row for 2 rounds. This is starting to get pretty good. Now we can add 20 power to our air mages as well as himself for 40. If my air mage suddenly has, let's quickly go to my spreadsheet. Let's say I've got an air mage who had like 30 power, 35, 30 power, which is very common. And suddenly Buddy's giving me an additional 20. And now I can have 50 power. I'm suddenly dishing out like 159 a round. Okay. That's almost that 20 power is making up for not having another air mage, because if I'm able to do this much instead of what I was able to do at 30 power, okay, plus that the nature mage is going to also take benefit from that on the next round and is able to do DPS. The problem is he gives up, the nature mage gives up 1 round to get that going. So you got to kind of think about this over multiple rounds. I think at the higher level play, when fights last more than, let's say, 4 rounds, suddenly nature mage with air mage is starting to make a little bit more sense. Let's go back though and truly investigate this. So if we've got, if we go up to Vine Lash 1, this is probably their best ability. And this is why your nature mages, in order to be considered to even be viable to take the combat, they need to have this. They need to be at least level 5. It swaps positions. So when there's 2 enemies lined up, like if there's an enemy in the back row and an enemy in the front row, you can swap them around. Okay. So it costs 30, which is a little heavy, but the thing is it does 25 plus power. So now you can see a scenario where if you have a good power rating on, let's say you got 25 power on your nature mage, now this thing can do 50, but it does it to 2 enemies. It's now doing 100 damage. Well, let's say you'd gone and cast this one on yourself the previous round. Well, now you're looking at 45, 50, 60, 70 damage times 2. You just dished out 140 damage on your second turn, which is like 70 damage a turn for the first 2 turns, right? And you still got 1 more round to act, or your air mage got 2 full rounds, hopefully, depending on how you tinkered it on that. So it is definitely starting to get there. The problem with Surge's Strength is it needs to last for 3 rounds. That's the other issue with it. 2 rounds is no good because he misses. If he casts himself, he misses out. Or if he doesn't go first, right? So now you need to have high speed on him as well. If he doesn't go first, then the other mage just sits there, has it on for a round. The problem with these things, when they say rounds, what they need to say is attacks. This should add 20 power to allies in the target row for 2 attacks, right? Then it actually makes sense. Anyhow, it's still pretty powerful when you combine it up, but it really gets out of control later, okay? So let's just skip past Vine Lash. The last thing I'll say about Vine Lash is not only does it do significant damage to 2 enemies, but it moves them. Okay, it swaps their positions. This can allow you to manipulate the battlefield to get their AoEers into the front line so that you can blast them down much faster. You can get the highly dangerous creatures into the front row so that everyone can focus them down instead of, an AoE. So this is high utility, especially once you get into Skull 2 and 3 battles. There's a large argument for a nature mage having a valid place on your combat team once you're getting up into this. But here, if you can get up to 6 and 7, then now the argument is almost, there is no more argument anymore. 13 strength 3 adds 30 power to allies in targeted row. Okay, well, we can see what that's going to do. That is going to increase Vine Lash's power, and it's going to increase the Air Mage's multi-strike to sickening levels. It becomes well worth casting on turn 1 and buffing the back row. In fact, there's also even argument of saying this would be effective to cast on the front row while your tanks, because their smashes could start really ripping things apart, but that would be much later. I would just say turn 1, Surging Strength 3 on the back row for the Air Mage plus himself. And then, because you need to be level 7 for this to really, truly come alive, Vine Lash 2. You can now have the utility of swapping the positions. You're doing damage to that back row creature on the pull, not having to even wait. Okay, so it does have reach in that sense, but it's doing 50 plus power for 30, right? So now, if you'd buffed, if let's say the guy had 30 power, and now you buffed it, and now he's up to 60 power. This thing's doing 110 to 2 creatures. It just did 220, plus you also buffed your Air Mage with this 30 power. So level 7 Nature Mage becomes completely a valid choice to start bringing into combat. It almost becomes, at the highest level of play, Skull 3, Skull 4, a completely necessary choice as well. Okay, so that's my thoughts on the Nature Mage. Let's have a quick look at how his numbers stack. Growth 2 takes 3 turns to do the max damage, does do 70 though, is not that far off from some of the other guys, and has a pretty good mana ratio for what it's going to do. The downfall is the creature has to live for 3 turns. That's generally the creature you're doing damage to. You don't want them to live for 3 turns. So if he's hitting the creature, you'd think somebody else would be as well. But I can see scenarios where this is effective. Okay, it's not bad. It's just not great. Vine Lash 1 can do 100 damage because of it doing 25 plus power to 2 targets. Okay, it does 100 damage. It dishes out, but the mana ratio is terrible. But Vine Lash 2 gets pretty good. Now you can do 150 damage per turn. Okay, and don't forget, you can cast this over and over. Its mana ratio is 5.0 for the damage it's doing. That is not terrible. And it's more damage per turn than anybody else is really ripping. And that's unbuffed. And that's based on 25 power. So this one is worth highlighting simply because it is quite overpowered. It is quite overpowered and should be recognized as so when you are looking at all these other abilities where, like I say, a level 7 Nature Mage is quite strong. So last, let's look at the Water Mage. The Water Mages, they get something called Soak 1. So what Soak 1 does is attacks an enemy and lowers their power and speed by 7. Okay. The debuff. Interesting. 15 plus power. Extremely low damage. Mana cost 40. There's not many arguments where I'm saying it's worth to bring in this mage with low DPS who's debuffing power and speed by 7, which is really, it's a mitigation, but it's not the kind of mitigation that we care about for that effect. This mana cost, if it was me, this would be 10. This should be 10 at this level. Skip it. Don't cast it. Torrent 2. Attacks an enemy. Deals 20 damage attacking from the back row. Well, your Water Mage is a DPS mage. He's always going to be in the back row. Okay? He's not going to be in the front row. So he's always going to be doing the plus 20 damage. So when we do our calculations, we factor that in. And so that's really just 30 plus power for 10. That's not bad, but it's not strong enough. It needs to do more damage. I think this back row condition should be higher. I think this damage should be higher. This should be 20 and 30 to bring it in line with other attacks. Okay? That's all it does. And it has the condition that has to be in the back row. Consecrating drops. Adds 30 armor to allies in a target row and removes these debuffs. I don't even think I've ever been affected by any of these. I never even pay any attention to them. So I'm not thinking right now that I care about removing those in general. Adding 30 army to the allies in the targeted row, I really don't feel that that's worth a turn when tanks generally are able to take care of themselves. And also, if I'm bringing a water mage to do this, why would I not just be bringing an air mage and casting the shield on the front row, which mitigates an entire attack, right? This mitigates 30 arm. If this was to be valid, this would have to, and I think this is a way that the developers can make a very important change to the game. This has to do way more armor to allow us to not have to bring earth mages for our front row. Whereas a water mage could be considered a tank, where he would be buffing himself plus whoever's in the other slot. It needs to do more in order for it to be viable. Because right now, at the highest levels of play, get lower level play, I bet there's all sorts of funky trickery you can do. But at the highest level play, this just doesn't do enough in order for me to consider bringing it. And 60 cost is ridiculous. When you consider earth armor for earth mage costs 20, this is ridiculous, this cost. This should cost 20 at the most. Next is Soak 2. Literally just the same as Soak 1 is their DPS ability. They've increased the damage it does a little bit, and now they debuff by 15. Okay, it's not getting bad. It's getting a little bit better. But it's not enough mitigation to justify the cost. It's still too low. I wouldn't even consider that this is even something at this level for 40. This would have to cost much, much less for me to think that this is effective. If this costs 10, okay, this would be a great ability. And I might even consider using it sometimes, but still, the debuff's not strong enough. Very unlikely. Constraint drops. Add 30 armor to all allies. Okay, this would be great back when there was mass AoE, but there's no mass AoE. So this has to be rebalanced. This needs to read at least at minimum 60 armor to the front row. It should literally do what this one does to the targeted row, and should just do 60. Okay, it can remove this stuff, and the cost is too high. Okay, it should cost 20. So the whole water mage, unfortunately, right now needs a complete rebalancing. Their last ability is Soak 3. This is the only one where I even start to consider that I might use it. Debuffing power by 30. Again, I don't care about speed. All my mages are going to be faster than the mobs. But debuffing the power by 30 is a considerable mitigation, where you can bring a level 7 water mage to a fight with 2 earth mages and literally make you start making them indestructible. The problem is this still is only a single enemy, and it's the 60 plus power, which is underrated. It's underpowered for the cost. I feel like water level 7-2 needs to do this to a row, to a targeted row. And if it could do it, like if you could do 2 mobs with this, with that effect, I feel like all of these soaks need to be target a row, not single target. If they were target a row and the mana cost was lowered, they might be more valid to use, especially at the highest levels of play. Because at this level, if this could do a row and reduce that, and they could do the next turn, could do the back row and reduce that, the cost could stay the same, and the damage could stay the same, because this would be very, very effective mitigation. But again, right now, water mages, I'm sorry, you can always do better. There is no reason to ever bring them to combat. And we'll look at their stats. Soak. It has the worst mana ratio, I think, on this entire list. Yes, it does, with a 1 factor. Okay, it's just terrible costed. Torrent 2. Good mana costing, just not high enough damage compared to everyone else. And we have already guys who literally do more than what these guys do. And for a much lower, like the mana ratio is worse. Soak 2 doesn't get much better. Okay. the single target is still too low. We don't really care or feel this. This is not that effective. Whoever we're targeting to do damage is going to die. It's not that we're going to do this to other ones, and 15 power lower is going to make a huge difference. But the mana ratio is just pathetic. It's horrible. Soak 3. Okay, here we go. We actually can highlight this because Soak 3 is starting to breach into the world of some of our other highest single target damage or damage per turn, abilities. It's definitely getting there, but the mana ratio is so bad that why? He brings nothing else to the fight. Okay. This is all that is the extra for it, for all that extra mana. I just think it's too high. And don't forget, this is a level 7 water mage. You have had to work very hard to have a level 7 water mage. You've invested a lot into them, and you just have overall better choices because whoever you're doing your damage to, especially with this kind of cost, lowering their power by 30 is not mitigating that much damage. That's a factor. You know what mitigates damage? Getting the mob dead. Maybe at the highest level of battles, there could be some argument for it. The problem is that if he's trying to do this and he's trying to mitigate damage in this way, he's just going to run out of mana extremely fast because the ratio is so terrible. So it needs to be rebalanced. Okay. So something to also realize is that there is a common event in the game that is called High Stink Arises. And anyone who's watched my actual Let's Play videos will know that I love when that event happens. It lasts for about 5 in-game days. And all it does is it makes air mages get to go twice every turn. So all of a sudden, these guys are doing double damage every turn because they're attacking twice. And it seems to be a very common event. I sometimes will get it within the first 12 days, almost like 90% reliable. And sometimes I get twice in a playthrough by like day 50. I've had it twice. So that's another reason why air mages are just brutally overpowered. So, okay, my final thoughts here. If I'm going to give these guys tiers, Earth Mage, its tier is broken. It literally, you have an argument here for taking 4 Earth Mages as your combat lineup because they're amazing at DPS and they're amazing at tanking. And they have an unbelievable AoE spell, which does some of the highest damage per turn with some of the highest mana efficiencies per turn. Right? Completely broken. Next is, of course, Air Mage. They are S tier. There's no doubt in my mind. These are unbelievable, and we should be bringing them to almost every single fight. And I would say 2 Earth Mage, 2 Air Mage is still the de facto go-to lineup. However, here's the caveat to that, which is Nature Mages. I'm putting Nature Mages at A tier, but I'm going to say level 7. Okay? Other than that, they are a C tier at best, if not a D tier. Okay? So this is a conditional where it's A tier if it's level 7. Otherwise, I give them a rating of D as their tier. After that, we have Dark Mages. Dark Mages, due to their AoE abilities, they do have some damage output. Not that it necessarily would be bringing them. But if they get up to level 7, I would say that they are B tier at best. And that's at level 7 in order to get that. Otherwise, in my opinion, they're C tier at best. Here, for sure. Sorry, I'm just getting this in. Fire Mages, because of their Fireball 3, but with their bad mana ability and the utility of Flame Lash, as well as the Retaliate, they are definitely getting up there. But I would say at best, they are the first member of what I would say is, A tier ability, right? And that's only when they get Flame Lash 2 that I would say they're A tier. Okay, so that's also, once again, level 7 for them to hit that in my mind. Otherwise, they're a B tier beyond that, at best. Lightning Mage, unfortunately, is a D tier currently for me. They just bring nothing that I would ever want or care about in a battle. They're like nature mages before they hit, but they just never ever graduate up into anything that is valid to come. This is their only redeeming factor, but at that level of mana efficiency, they're just junk. I might as well just cast this for the better ratio, but why would I bring this? The reach is a little nice, but there's better ways to handle that. Water mages, unfortunately, they are also, at this current state they're in, they are not valid to bring into combat. They are D tier 100%. And that is unfortunate, but they are. So that is how I say the state of the game is, and have really discussed a lot of the balancing issues related to all their combat spells and how things work. You can see with scaling, as I've done a few times here, if I start to up the power levels, the scaling just continues for all these. And it doesn't get any better. And notice this, Vine Lash is about the only one that as you scale continues to get better, just like the other ones. Okay. So, but the other ones that increase, it's just not enough, right? Sure, the AoEs also get stronger, but don't forget, as these AoEs are getting stronger, these AoEs, these targeted row AoEs are getting stronger with amazing mana efficiency. So if you want to look at the way it would look, how would I do it? I would be running, as I have been, Earth Mage in the front 2 slots, like I always do, and 2 Air Mages in the back 2 slots with 20 to 25 power until I upgrade them. Later, I would strongly even consider going with 4x Earth Mages. Okay. If I really wanted to kind of abuse the game, right? I might try and do that. But I think the ultimate lineup for your high level stuff, like when you're at level 7, is going to be 2 Earth Mages, 1 Air Mage, and 1 level 7 Nature Mage. Because of this utility, plus the fact that it starts to light up, and you have the buff for 30 power that can go onto your Air Mage and can go even onto your Nature Mage. And then if you wanted to, you could cast it on your frontline tanks. So I think ideally I would go end game, 2 tanks, 2 Earth Mages, 1 Air Mage, 1 Nature Mage, and that would be my combat team. So interested to hear everyone's thoughts on this. This is a little bit of a different video than I normally make, but I've been thinking about this and working on these numbers because trying to figure out like exactly how I want to long-term play things, where they are. I feel like there's a lot of balance issues with combat. It's early access, so that's totally understandable. But I feel like of all the things that developers can start to play with, it would be some of the numbers with the spells. It's not hard to go into the code and adjust numbers to balance the mages better and to allow us to test with them and get the fluidity there. Because what I'd like to see, in my honest opinion, and I really believe this, is that all mages are valid for combat. That's what I would like to see the state of the game be. All mages, we should be having arguments about comps and tier levels and like the way that people would do for Darkest Dungeon, for example, right? Where it's like there's lots of valid comps and arguments as to bring this, bring that, like combos and stuff. Right now we don't get that. We've just figured out the formula, which is bring these guys because of reasons, right? There's not enough options. I don't know if they need to add more mage types. I don't know if they need to add crowd control and other abilities and things like that. But they definitely, for combat, are going to have to at least take the current state of mages and balance it. And as much as I love my earth mages, they need to be down-tuned probably a bit. I think they're a little bit too powerful. I think the air mages are probably a little bit overpowered, but at least they're relatively on par. And I don't like seeing stuff get nerfed. So what I'd like to really see is bring some of these other mages up, like buff them up or change their abilities like I've suggested, or other people's ideas. Bring their ability up so that we're wanting to bring them to combat. Because right now, if you're playing the hardest settings, Darkness Descends Relentless, you do not want to give yourself a disadvantage in combat. You want to just take the best that you can possibly get your hands on at all times. And since we can be pretty selective about what mages we decide are going to be in our combat mages as we recruit, train up, do medallions, appraise how they work against each other, etc., and we can get the lineup we want every time, right? So yeah, I think there's a lot of balancing that needs to be done. There shouldn't be this much disparity where the top two mage types are almost hands down, no reason not to take them. We've got a third one who only matters then at level 7, where fire mages maybe at level 7, and then all the rest of them are like, never play them. Not worth it. Even this one's B tier at level 7. So dark mage, lightning mage, water mage, never play. Fire mage, nature mage, never play unless level 7. Earth mage, air mage, always best, always play. Argument for nature mage at level 7. And there's even a concept now, which I think I'm going to do a video series with, where my combat team is 4 earth mages, 4 Wolfkin earth mages. I think I don't know if I'll do a series like that, but it would be good to do, because then I could start right out of the gate. And I just call it Earth Mage only, right? And now I would take other mages, of course, for the school, because you need them for getting things, but I would just literally just be Earth Mage crushing everything. And I would recruit Earth Mages for tier 2 and then tier 3 and so on, so that I could get access to Smash 3 and eventually Quake 2, and just completely just wreck the face of the game with, because think about that. Oh, my Earth Mages in the front row, I took a very, very hard battle and they have perished. Yeah, well, I still have 2 tanks. Right, whereas normally what happens with the 2 Earth Mages go down in a really tough battle, it's a wipe. Okay, the back row guys cannot possibly hold things together. But if the Earth Mages at the back were still, or they could start tanking, they might actually be able to finish the fight beyond what the regular guys could do. Who knows? But I'm just so alarmed that Smash 3 is on par with multi-strike for mana cost and for damage. I'm just amazed. So. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to leave your comments, because I am interested to hear what other people who have been watching my videos think and who have remained and watched this entire discussion on the combat of the mages. I would love to hear your feedback. Have I gotten some numbers wrong? Am I not looking at things the correct way? That being said, have a great day, and we'll see you in the next one.